In the small tree-lined town of Willow Creek, where maple trees blaze crimson every fall, and the community prided itself on close-knit ties, Emily Harper was raising her 8-year-old daughter, Riley, with a blend of fierce love and quiet determination. Riley, with her untamed auburn curls and a grin that could light up a room, was the kind of child who lived for adventure. She'd climb trees in her backyard, race her friends on bikes until dusk, and cheer louder than anyone when her school's dodgeball team scored a hit. To Emily, Riley's spirited nature was her greatest strength, a spark of independence in a world that often tried to dim such flames. Emily, a single mother who worked as a freelance graphic designer, had moved to Willow Creek a year ago after a messy divorce. The fresh start was meant to give Riley a stable, joyful childhood, and the new school, Willow Creek Elementary, seemed perfect. With its sprawling playground, dedicated teachers, and a vibrant community of parents, it felt like a place where Riley could thrive. But there was one complication Emily hadn't anticipated: her family's overwhelming presence in her daughter's life. Emily's mother, Margaret, and her older sister, Clara, were pillars of the Willow Creek community. Margaret, a retired school teacher with a penchant for perfection, was a fixture at every school event. Her homemade lemon squares were legendary at bake sales, and her ability to organize a fundraiser was unmatched. Clara, a part-time librarian with a sharp eye for detail, was equally involved, often volunteering to monitor lunch periods or read to younger classes. To the school, they were saints. To Emily, they were a storm waiting to break. At first, their involvement seemed harmless. When Riley started at Willow Creek Elementary in the fall, Margaret and Clara were thrilled. "We'll make sure she settles in," Margaret had promised, her voice warm but edged with the authority she'd wielded in her classroom for decades. Emily, grateful for the support, didn't think much of it. She was busy juggling deadlines and helping Riley adjust to the new school, so having her family nearby felt like a blessing. But the small intrusions began almost immediately. One afternoon, Emily unpacked Riley's lunchbox to find her daughter's favorite fruit roll-ups replaced with a neatly packed container of sliced cucumbers and hummus. A note from Clara read, "Healthier choices for a growing girl." Emily sighed, brushing it off. Riley, however, was less forgiving. "I hate hummus, Mom," she grumbled, her freckled nose wrinkling. "Why can't I just eat what I want?" Emily reassured her, promising to talk to Clara. But the conversation didn't go as planned. "We're just looking out for her, Em," Clara said, her tone clipped. "Kids need structure, not sugar." Margaret chimed in, her voice soft but firm. "You're doing your best, dear, but we've raised children. We know what works." The situation escalated as the weeks passed. Margaret and Clara began showing up at recess, their volunteer badges gleaming like badges of authority. Emily would hear stories from Riley about how Grandma had encouraged her to play with nicer girls instead of her usual group of friends, mostly boys who loved roughhousing and racing across the playground. "Grandma said I should be more ladylike," Riley said one evening, her voice small as she sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, clutching her favorite stuffed dinosaur. "But I like playing with Ethan and Jamal. They're fun." Emily's heart sank. She remembered her own childhood, when Margaret had insisted she trade her soccer cleats for ballet slippers, claiming sports were too rough for a girl. Emily had complied back then, but she'd vowed to let Riley choose her own path. She called her mother, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Mom, Riley gets to pick her friends. Please don't push her into things she doesn't want." Margaret's response was a mix of hurt and defiance. "I'm only helping her fit in, Emily. You don't want her to be an outcast, do you?" The conversation ended with Margaret promising to back off, but Emily could hear the unspoken judgment in her mother's voice. "You're not doing this right." Then came the incident with the motivational cards. One crisp October morning, Margaret arrived at school with a stack of handmade cards, each adorned with glitter and neatly written phrases like, "You are enough," and "Shine bright." She'd spent hours crafting them, and during recess, she instructed Riley to hand them out to every child in her class. Riley, mortified, shuffled from desk to desk, her cheeks burning as her classmates giggled or stared. When Emily picked her up that afternoon, Riley's eyes were red from crying. "Everyone laughed at me, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't want to do it, but Grandma said I had to." Emily's blood boiled. She confronted Margaret that evening, her voice shaking with frustration. "You embarrassed her, Mom. You can't just take over her life like that." Margaret's eyes widened, her hand fluttering to her chest. "I was trying to teach her kindness, Emily. You're making me out to be the villain when I'm just helping." Clara, who was there for dinner, jumped in. "You're too permissive, Em. Kids need guidance, not freedom to run wild." Emily left the conversation feeling drained, torn between her love for her family and her need to protect Riley's autonomy. She thought the worst was behind them, until the dodgeball incident. Riley loved gym class. Twice a week, Willow Creek Elementary's gym echoed with the squeak of sneakers and the thump of dodgeballs. Riley was a star player, her quick reflexes and fearless throws earning her cheers from her teammates. Emily cherished the stories Riley brought home, her eyes sparkling as she recounted diving catches or epic matches. So when Riley came home one Thursday, her face streaked with tears, Emily knew something was terribly wrong. "They made me miss gym. Mom, Riley sobbed, clutching her backpack. Grandma and Aunt Clara said dodgeball's too rough for girls. They signed me up for knitting club instead. Emily's stomach churned. Knitting club? Riley, who could barely sit still long enough to tie her shoes, was now expected to wield needles and yarn? She knelt beside her daughter, brushing a curl from her face. What happened, sweetheart? Tell me everything. Through sniffles, Riley explained how Margaret and Clara had shown up at school, spoken to the gym teacher, and pulled her out of class without so much as a phone call to Emily. They'd escorted her to the library where the knitting club met and handed her a pair of needles. Grandma said it's more ladylike, Riley said, her voice breaking. But I love dodgeball. Why can't I just be me? Emily's heart broke, but her anger burned hotter. This wasn't just meddling, it was a betrayal of Riley's trust and a dismissal of her identity. She hugged her daughter tightly, promising to fix it. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone, debating whether to call her mother or take more drastic action. She'd tried talking, reasoning, pleading. Nothing had worked. Margaret and Clara's vision of who Riley should be, a polite, delicate girl who fit their outdated ideals, was suffocating her daughter's spirit. The next morning, Emily marched into Willow Creek Elementary and requested a meeting with the principal, Ms. Delgado. A kind but no-nonsense woman with a knack for solving problems, Ms. Delgado listened as Emily poured out her frustrations. She described the lunch swaps, the recess interventions, the motivational cards, and now the knitting club fiasco. They're undermining me as a parent, Emily said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. I want them to stop interfering with Riley's school life unless I give permission. Ms. Delgado nodded, her expression sympathetic but firm. I understand, Ms. Harper. Your mother and sister are valued volunteers, but your authority as Riley's parent comes first. I'll implement a policy that no one can alter your daughter's schedule, activities, or interactions without your explicit consent. I'll also speak to them directly to ensure they understand. Emily left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and dread. She knew her family wouldn't take this well, but she was done letting them steamroll her parenting. When she picked Riley up that afternoon, her daughter was back in gym class, a dodgeball tucked under her arm and a grin on her face. Thanks, Mom, she said, hugging Emily tightly. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she'd done right by her daughter, but the fallout was swift. That evening, Margaret called, her voice trembling with indignation. How could you humiliate us like this, Emily? Going to the principal behind our backs? We're only trying to help Riley be a proper young lady. Clara, on speakerphone, was even sharper. You're letting her run wild, Em. You're a bad mother if you think dodgeball and roughhousing are what she needs. The words stung, cutting deeper because they came from the people Emily loved most. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm her mother, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. I decide what's best for Riley, not you. She's happy, she's healthy, and she's herself. If you can't respect that, you won't be part of her school life anymore. The line went silent. Margaret's voice, when it came, was softer, almost pleading. We just want what's best for her, Emily. But Emily held firm. Then trust me to know what that is. Over the next few weeks, the boundaries held. Margaret and Clara stopped volunteering at school, their absence a quiet relief for Emily and Riley. Riley flourished, her laughter echoing from the playground as she played dodgeball and raced her friends. Emily, though, couldn't shake the ache of her strained relationship with her family. She hoped in time they'd see Riley for who she was, not a project to be molded, but a bright, bold girl with a spirit all her own. For now, Emily focused on her daughter, cheering at dodgeball games and packing fruit roll-ups in her lunch. In Willow Creek, under the crimson maples, Emily and Riley were writing their own story, one where love meant freedom, not control.